Hello and welcome to episode number 97 of the Board Game Barrage podcast, a podcast about board games, the latest hotness, and how to have fun with Mark and Neelan, even when you're losing. I am Kellen, the Red Tank, joined by Neelan and Mark.
Hey.
Hello.
They are here. They are my friends. This discussion is over, Internet.
I noticed you're back in the room this episode.
Yeah. I was hoping for a different outcome.
Yeah, someone said that on our Discord, that they were hoping that joke would continue.
Yeah,
and I was sort of like, what's the subtext of this here? I mean, maybe it's
not sub. There's no sub about it. It's all text.
We open the episode just Mark and I, then Kellen walks in halfway through. We could have done that.
If you want to be involved in these sort of hijinks, you can join us at boardgamebarrage.com/Discord. That's Discord. It is a chat room where we talk to each other as friends. And then Mark and Neelan say dumb things, and I sound intelligent there. On this week's episode of the Board Game Barrage podcast, we are going to be talking about the games that we have played this week and our featured topic, which is board game biases.
BGB?
Oh, there's a lot of BGBs in the industry, so that is a little bit of a problem, but only one true and living BGB. Board game biases are some of those inherent things that we don't maybe realize influence our purchasing decisions, influence whether we like or dislike a game. So we want to talk about some of our own biases while also sort of touching on what we perceive as some of the biases within the industry. But before we do that, the games we have played. Neelan.
Yes.
What have you been playing without me this week?
I wanted to do a very quick revisit of Cursed Court because I played another 5-player game of this, and I spoke about this last week as perhaps being less good at 5 than at 6, which is a little bit absurd seeing as that it only goes up to 6. This game sort of felt closer to the 6-player games we had where it was just fighty and people were into it and enjoying it and sort of on board for everything was throwing at you. I don't know what to make of that except to say obviously all board games are, depend on people being into the experience. And I felt like this just felt like it was a bit more bouncy, a little bit more fighty in a way that was fun. So I'm back in on Cursed Court. And that, I think, is all I have to say about that this week. Mostly, I want to talk about Flamme Rouge. This is a bicycle racing game. It's a game that Kellen and I had played a few years ago. We played at Gen Con, if I remember correctly, Kellen, in our first pre-BGB Gen Con, where...
Mark.
Back in the bad old days.
Yeah, the good...
Bad old days?
Bad old days.
Because
before Mark, what was there? It was nothing. There's 2 of you in a hotel room in Indianapolis. Now look what happened. Now we're titans of industry. Because of what? What's the difference? What's the difference between then and now?
Well, to be clear, I wasn't part of Board Game Barrage either.
Well, but you were much closer. Your influence had done nothing. My influence, and then boom shakalaka.
I remember distinctly just following Kellen around in the pre-nascent Board Game Barrage days.
You are nascent.
I don't know what that word means, but I will say that we've just canonically sort of made it clear who the CEO of Board Game Barrage is, because I think I've heard it. Mark, you weren't here, so thanks.
I'm the secret ingredient. I'm the secret. I'm like the little spice that puts you over the edge.
So anyway,
you're the spice.
Yeah,
I'm the
23 herbs and spices. That's me. You're the chicken, and I'm the spices.
Okay, wait.
So Flamme Rouge.
Wait, but this is we're KFC now.
Yeah. K for Kellen.
My favorite game. F for Neil.
For
South Africa.
From South Africa.
Yep.
And C for crispy chicken spices.
I absolutely love taking us and then applying it to things when people are like, you're like the Beatles, and I'm like, which one is the good one?
You're like, who are the Beatles? That's what you do.
Okay, but I'm the chicken?
Yeah.
In KFC?
Yeah.
I'm the substantive meaty part that you bite into?
Right. You're the thing that like people can buy anywhere. So it's great. You're like, fine, everybody wants it. Everybody wants the chicken.
Well, you have to have the chicken.
Yeah, you
what
have
if
to
you
I'm not saying you have to have the
spices?
chicken. You have to have the chicken.
Which would be the
weirdest tangent we've ever had.
Which would be the most important ingredient in fried chicken?
Well,
the spices? Would you rather have
what cannot live from bread alone or from chicken alone.
What would
you
subsist on? Wait, what is Neelan in this? He's
from South Africa.
From South Africa?
Yeah.
So I'm the chicken, you're the spices, and Neelan's from South Africa?
Yeah, exactly. KFC.
Got it.
Yeah.
All right. Moving on.
So Kellen and I played this at Gen Con as a 3-player game, and I think we both sort of felt it didn't feel as strong as 3 players as we thought as it could, because that game is about positioning yourself to slipstream and benefit off the position of other bikers in the game. So I was curious to play it with more players. I ended up playing a 5-player game of Flamme Rouge this weekend. So to set up what Flamme Rouge is, it's a bicycle racing game that's quite simple. So you have 2 cyclists, and they each have a different deck associated with them, which have different distribution of cards between 2 and 9, I think, are the biggest ones. That deck is fixed, and each pair of cyclists has the exact same decks for every player. So you're starting off on exactly the same footing, as it were. On your turn, you draw 4 cards from each deck, pick one of those cards to play, and that's the distance your cyclist moves. That card is then lost, and you can't play it again. So it's a game about finding the right time to sort of surge ahead, the right time to sort of take it steady, because your cards are going to be sufficient to get you towards the end of the track, but finding the right timing for specific bursts of speeds and positioning is vital, because if you're ever at the head of a pack of bikes, you gain an exhaustion card, and that's going to make your hand of cards worse. If you ever position yourself so you're a pack that is a little bit away from a pack in front of you, you get a free little move forward. So it's all about sort of finding the right positioning for your bikes at the end of your turn so that you benefit the most from what other people are doing. It's a very cool game. I thought was maybe a little bit chaotic at 5 players, which kind of presents this interesting dilemma, because it kind of seems like there's this perfect sweet spot at 4 players, which I have not played a game.
My only play of Flamme Rouge was at 4.
Okay, and did it work well?
It did work well. It was like a nail-biting ending. I think everybody was in it the entire time. It's been a couple of years since I've played it, but I remember really enjoying it. It's just a game that I have my eye on to reacquire, or to acquire, because this was another player's copy that we were playing. And I know that Shut Up and Sit Down loves it, but for whatever reason, I don't see it around too often. And it's a game that I would love to play again. Mm-hmm. The expansion, I don't know if you've heard of it.
Yeah, so we played the Peloton expansion,
Great.
Which actually adds the 5th and 6th player, I believe, as well as a couple of new terrain things, which were quite interesting, because they give you areas of the track where you can't do the slipstreaming mechanics, so you have to sort of just focus on getting ahead.
I see.
Where the paths like narrow and widen away from the normal too. So it did add some interesting sort of things into the mix that I quite liked. I think the best thing I can say about Flamme Rouge is I think race games are such a simple concept to explain to most people. The mechanics are so simple that you could get almost anyone in on board with what you're doing in like next to no time. And it's still a substantively like tactical, strategic game, because of like trying to find the right timing for your cards is everything, that I found it pretty rewarding.
Yeah.
I would love to try do it at, I think it sounds like, honestly, weirdly enough, 4 is the ideal count for it. I would love to sort of play more games of it at the ideal count with some of the more interesting like weather and terrain mechanics thrown in.
I think that this type of game does not shine on a first play.
Correct.
And the first blush is sort of like, like, is that actually it? Because it seems so basic, for lack of a better word, like what you're doing. And so the fact that this is still kicking around as a game that people kind of champion makes me more interested in it, even though my first couple exposures to it, I'm just like, it seems obvious what to do, or it's so basic, which is just like choosing which card to play, doesn't feel that impactful.
Right.
But that type of game can lead to some of my absolute favorite games in the long term if that depth is actually there,
right,
buried underneath a very simple system.
That was Flamme Rouge.
I'm now imagining like a scenario where we have to like bike 5 miles, and then play the game.
Oh,
kind of like the chess,
boxing chess,
chess.
Yeah,
because we probably can't play it while we're biking.
What should do? Why have we never done something like that?
Because you'd probably lose.
Like boxing chess?
I mean,
boxing? Are you kidding? I've trained.
Let's go. Let's do boxing podcasting.
No,
but we
can I kick you?
Yeah. Well, it's kickboxing.
That's what I'm saying.
Sure.
Are you going to outlaw the type of training that I had?
I'm fine. I'm fine with all kinds of blows.
All right. So I wanted to talk about a new John Cloudis release. John Cloudis is one of my favorite board game designers who designed Omen, A Reign of War, which is one of my favorite 2-player battlers, and is also the designer of a game I'm really excited to receive this year called Mezzo. Sorry, Neelan, you're dumb for not backing it.
How dare you.
But The North is his latest small box games release. He does Kickstarters where he prints these games and ships them out in a ridiculously short time frame. So The North, I think I kickstarted it 2 or 3 months ago and already have it in hand. It is the smallest, cutest, tiniest little box. But The North is a 2-player pseudo-dueler game where you are acquiring ancient cards, which are sort of these character cards that have values from 1 to 3, and you are building up a tableau of facilities and ancients. So every card has 2 sides to it. So there's a lot of flip-flopping back and forth between the 2 sides of the cards. And you also have this node that is always charging. And a big part of the game is figuring out when to discharge your node to sort of hit the other guy for points. So the way that it works is both players have 40 health points, for lack of a better term. And as you hurt the other player, they go down. And once a player gets to 0 points, then the scores are scored where your tableau is added to how much health you have left. A turn in the North is very procedural. You're sort of following these 3 or 4 steps where you can do certain directives, but you can never do more than 2 of the same directive. So you're choosing 3 actions to take. You could be taking face-up ancients from an array. You could be taking a facility. You could be playing cards and doing different things. But everything you do has sort of a yin and yang effect with your opponent, because your opponent will get to acquire one of the ancients that you didn't pick up for free. So you don't want to leave an ancient in the array that they're going to really need for their tableau. In addition to that, every card you don't play hurts the other opponent by that many points. So you're kind of evaluating everything from that context. And at the end of the game, the cards in your deck are worth their value from 1 to 3, but cards that you have played out into the tableau are only worth 1 point. So what that means is an ancient that has a really cool power, you may want to bring it out into the field to use its power, but then it's actually going to be worth less victory points. So you're constantly evaluating the points. It's a very min-max thing, but I think it's pretty cleverly hidden because the art is wonderful. Super cool sci-fi weird art. I think it was a great choice not to just make this some fantasy generic thing. I really enjoy the North, but I'm struggling to even describe it here. Mark, you played it with me. How did you feel about the North?
Yeah, I think its uniqueness was breathtaking, maybe too strong a word, but it was a small card game, which I love, that felt super fresh, and the mechanisms just felt, while I'd seen them before, like taking a card and playing a card, like all that stuff is standard, and there's nothing maybe super crazy about that, but the way they all meshed together just felt, again, very unique and very fresh. It led to, at least for me, because it was my first time playing, some of my first actions being a little stuttering, like, oh wait, what happens if I do this, and how does this activate that? But after that, the rules, while they're a little unique, they're small. There's not very many to them. And so you get a hold of them fairly quickly, and then it's just like the game sort of reveals itself in all these like intricate machinations, like things connect together in ways you don't normally see in games. So it felt like a breath of fresh air for a small card game.
Where does this fit in the pantheon of 2-player Cloudus games for you?
Nealon is alluding to a broader discussion we had before turning on the mics, because we talk to each other when the mics aren't on, we assure you. Omen is in my top 50 games of all time. He has, I can just start naming them, Soulfall, Keep, Hemlock, Neolithic, different versions of Hemlock and Omen, and all of these are 2 to 4 player in some cases, but I have all of these games. So when you ask where this ranks, very hard to say. I will say that I am downsizing my collection again, and the North will definitely stay so that I can play it 3 or 4 more times and truly evaluate it, but I think it has a shot at sticking around. And some of his other designs, while I love them, I love all of his games, I don't feel the need to own 70 2-player card battler games.
That sounds cool. As someone that likes card battlers, this sounds interesting. Like the way you guys are describing some of the unique little things it does is pretty cool.
And it's sci-fi, Nealon.
I'm on board for that.
You go ape.
That is factually true.
That is.
Oh.
This is how we do a podcast. Tell people what the book is. What the game is at the beginning, and then also at the end. It's called book ending. That's why I was thinking of books.
All you do is spice food up. Does that make sense to you, Mark?
It does in the context of KFC. If KFC didn't have the spice, what would they be? I asked you that.
Let me just ask you a question.
If not for the spice, where would the kernel be?
Let me just ask you a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
Where is the closest KFC to you?
There used to be a KFC sort of near my house, but now it became a marijuana dispensary. And I think they still kept the KFC thing, but I forget what it's
Let me answer
both. It's like the same store. It's not a bad business model.
Do you want to hear my answer?
I do want to hear your answer.
Less than 60 seconds. I could start a timer from the top of my stairs, and be in KFC ordering the chicken
Oh, yes, there is
in
one.
60
Yes, okay.
seconds
Right.
or
near
less.
Near where I used to play flag football.
So when you say who knows more about KFC,
Right.
do you know who you're talking to?
You know it's 60 seconds because you've made that trek many times.
I start the timer.
Right.
I make
You
the
say,
track
Christina, I'll be back in 120 seconds.
with the chicken.
With the chicken. But not spicy chicken. Because I'm not there. Give it to me plain is what you say.
Mark,
Yes, sir.
tell us about a game that you played.
I'll tell you about a game that I've played from a company that I love, Capstone Games. They came out with the Estates and Irish Gauge and Lignum, yep. And Three Kingdoms, which is a game that I have, but we have not played yet, although I'd like us to play it. But anyway, all their games have been hits for me. I love all their stuff. Watergate was one of theirs, I think, right? Watergate?
I think so,
Yeah. So all their games I either love or I'm excited to play, and I was excited to play one of the latest ones, which is Ragusa. What you're doing in Ragusa is the main action is basically a worker placement. You are placing a house in one of two places. The board depicts the city of Ragusa, and you can either place your house in the countryside or inside the city. If you place it in the countryside, wherever you place your house, you are going to be adjacent to 3 hexes, and you will get a resource from every hex that you're adjacent to. So, for example, if I place my house in the countryside and I'm adjacent to a wood, a stone, and a grape, then I get a wood and a stone and a grape. The other place you can place your houses is inside the city. When you place your house inside the city, you're going to be triggering actions that are associated with the hexes that you're adjacent to. So I may place my house in a spot that is adjacent to the wall building hex and also adjacent to the trade grapes for wine hex. And so I'll be able to take those actions as many times as houses I have on those hexes. That's the basic conceit. You're either placing it in the countryside to get resources or inside the city to use those resources to manipulate them for a number of different reasons, including market manipulation and trading in a market. But the twist is that if somebody places a house inside the city, thereby taking actions, if you have a house in any of the hexes that is adjacent to the house that was just played, your actions triggers as well. So, for example, if Neelan had placed a house in the build the city wall action, and he'd taken his turn, so on his turn, he placed a house in there, he built part of the wall. And then later I go there and I place a house that touches that hex. So I placed my house there, I build the city wall, and then everybody on that hex who's placed buildings earlier also takes that action. So then in this case, Neelan would take that action again. And let's say Neelan had placed 2 houses on that hex, he would fire off twice. So the basic push-pull in this game is, do you want to place houses on the outside of the city to gain resources or place them inside the city to use those resources? So the idea is you might want to place houses outside to gain a bunch of resources so that your actions, once you place inside the city, are more impactful because you can do them to a larger extent. But if you're slow to place houses in the city, by the time you do start placing them in the city, you're basically allowing your opponents to take free actions. There's a market manipulation aspect to it. There's a hidden objective aspect to it. Everybody's dealt a card at the beginning of the game that tells you basically what aspect of the game will score you bonus points at the end of the game, sort of standard Euro stuff. So the game sounds interesting, and that idea that you would place an action and cause your opponents to take actions sounds interesting. But in practice, Ragusa was the first flop for me for Capstone Games. And maybe not a flop. It's an okay game, but I think the primary issue that I had, and it feels so slight, but there isn't really any penalty for the first player in this game. There's no second player doesn't get anything, third player doesn't get any bonuses. So the first player gets quite an edge by being able to, place his buildings inside first. And it's just, there's no balancing for that timing aspect. It feels like a couple interesting premises that don't really work out so much in terms of how the game works. It's a game where it's hard to catch up because once opponents have built an infrastructure, and the game runs very quickly. I think our game was probably about an hour, maybe an hour and a half, that there's not really much time or opportunity to come back once your opponents have placed a bunch of houses inside the city, because there's not really much you can do. Once you're behind, and you probably will be behind if you're late in the player order, all you can try to do is gain more resources to make your actions stronger, but it doesn't compensate for the fact that you're giving your opponents free actions. So it just feels a little out of whack. There's something missing there to it.
I remember thinking it looked like visually cool, but
Yeah.
honestly, my overwhelming memory of Ragusa was our Gen Con experience
Which was
of it.
hilarious.
Where I think Mark sat down for a demo of it, and after 10 minutes of listening to the rules, was just like,
Well-
for context,
Yes.
this is close to the very last thing we did at Gen Con. So after 4 days of this, we were all just beat.
Yeah.
And Mark just got up from the table and was like, I didn't take in anything that she's been saying for
Here's the thing. This is close to the end. We're all sort of tired. The place is loud because people are packing their stuff
Yeah.
up. All the vendors are packing up. And then somebody at the capstone booth, one of the people teaching the game, says, "Hey, does anyone play Ragusa?" And yeah, of course I want to play because again, Capstone Games has a great track record.
Yeah, and this was one of the ones
I was excited about.
for,
Yeah. And so I sit down, and the other people who sat down and played, they're all chatting amongst themselves, so they're not paying attention. And the rules explainer is talking so
quietly, yeah.
She's like, "You place your houses over here, and you get a wood or a stone." And I'm sitting next to her, I can't hear what she's saying. And she's looking around, she's not like paying attention. I got up and just walked away.
Funny anecdote. Haha. But I guess then the question is, right? You know how precious my time is,
Yes.
right? Would you say, Kellen, you should try Ragusa?
No, I would not. A, because I don't think you'd like it, even if it was more structurally sound. And B, I think that the first player advantage would annoy you greatly. I think it would be infuriating to you.
But I'm usually even keeled.
Yeah, right.
And like annoy me, that could be overstating it.
Sure.
Okay.
Sure.
No, but I think that is the barometer because of the implicit trust that I have in you.
Yeah.
Even if it was a broken mess that had something super cool or weird in it, you would say, yeah, you should play it once.
I can't imagine you liking it. And that is Ragusa from Capstone Games.
Before we get into our featured topic, we always like to read a review. Reviews are one of the ways that you can support the Board Game Barrage podcast. So this review comes from Kudaori. I can't say it, but it's not a real name, so that's fine. Two heroes versus...
I really hope that's not a real name.
Real name, yeah.
Two heroes versus one villain. This is the second best podcast I listen to.
What?
One of the hosts is always wrong, but every good piece of drama needs a villain. Thank you for the great podcast and keep up the good work.
Weird that the villain read that review.
Yeah, I feel like Neelan saved this for this moment so that I could read my own. Okay, here's the thing, right? While I will concede that I'm the villain, and actually probably be excited, right, that I'm in the villain of the podcast, I would say that our gaming opinions, if you look at our top 50 games and kind of start cross-checking them, there's an awful lot of crossover.
Yeah.
And the things that we enjoy end up being largely similar with some big divergence. So for Kudaore, whose name may not even be a real name, to say that the villain's opinion is always wrong, it seems circumspect, right? Have we mathed this out? We've deduced it. Why are you laughing?
I love it.
There's a point.
Yeah, there's a point.
Do you get it?
I'll get the point when I re-listen to it while doing the edit, I'm sure.
I'm serious.
We'll edit it to make sense.
You're saying that
I'm saying that
if you hurt one of us, you hurt us all.
Because we
all
have-
for one and
yeah.
one for all. No, I'm saying that I don't see how someone could regularly listen to the podcast and think that one of us is always wrong,
Right. Yeah. I think that's said in jest.
but not the villain part.
There's a truth in every lie. Is there a saying? That's a saying I just made up.
All right. That should probably be condensed
Yes.
because only part of it was good.
Which part is up to you to decide?
Yeah, which part is up to Mark to decide. That's the problem.
You got it.
So let us move into our featured topic. The topic of this week's episode is board game biases. We wanted to have a broad discussion about biases that we perceive in the industry in terms of why people choose to buy the games they do or the things that they may or may not like, but then also talk about some of our personal biases. I think the easiest way to get us into this discussion is just to start with an anecdote that I perceive about one of my best friends to play board games with, Kurt from New York City. There is a group of gamers who prefer board games when they are substantive in terms of their box size. Like you literally can evaluate board games and say, that is a small box card game, or that doesn't have enough components to it. I prefer board games. Like the word board games, I want to play a board game. So there is a bias against either card games, I think is included in this, or a bias against just literally smaller productions. They prefer their Kallax shelves to be full of games. How do you guys feel about this board game bias?
It's funny because in some ways I feel like I am tending towards the opposite, where I get inordinately angry at boxes that are bigger than they ought to be, which is not really the same discussion, but it's kind of like I would rather sort of have a mix of stuff just taking space in my apartment rather than have everything be these big box productions, which the more I get, the less I want.
Is there some sense that when you buy a game that the box size has some value ratio? Like if it's a big box, it might be...
Yeah, I think that's absolutely
I think it's
true.
the promise. The promise is a big box is going to be an epic experience. I think that's without question.
I think one of the best most recent examples, like Vindication, for example, is a game where its box size does not justify the game. In some ways, it's like, I don't want to be lugging this giant thing around for the size of the experience that Vindication offers. It is something that I find is a point of frustration for me.
If you've not seen the Suburbia Collector's Edition box, that is a box.
I have not seen this.
It's on our Discord.
I saw that somebody posted it, but I haven't looked at it yet. It's some crazy box.
It's like if you imagine a Kallax shelf, it's almost like one whole square of a Kallax.
Okay, and the idea is it has Suburbia plus the expansions?
Yeah, but it's interesting that it fits into a Kallax shelf, right?
Perfectly?
Like so, like from a width perspective, but then it's just like almost the full thing tall.
Right, yeah. Right.
It's nuts. Mark, why don't you give us one of your board game biases?
So this has to do with my penchant for trading. I'd say that I'm biased against new games in general. I've talked about this earlier on the show. And I struggle with this somewhat because games come out, and especially now that we review games, I feel compelled and drawn to find and play newer games if possible. And obviously just the excitement of new games coming out is something that everybody sort of feels to one extent or another. But I do like trading games quite a bit, and I like finding deals and making value trades. That's just something that I've always enjoyed. So that sort of manifests itself in me not really caring too much about new games. And I've mentioned this before, but sort of allowing games to come out on the market and find their level. You know, people will review them and look and play them, and then I wait until the next year to start picking up games. Like I would say that most of my acquisitions this year have been 2018 games rather than 2019 or 2018, 2017 games. I just, in general, when it comes to the latest hotness, I'm sort of not really that interested. I found myself over like the last year or so, to some extent, like losing track of what games are coming out. Whereas I used to know everything that was coming out, like release dates and everything. That's sort of not been as important to me.
So one of the things I was thinking about is we have the upcoming Strategicon cycle, right? There are 3 per year. The first one is in February.
Yeah.
And then they go throughout the season. And I'm going through a cull of my collection right now and likely getting rid of PAX Premier 2nd Edition.
Yeah.
And I just wonder if you're like going, oh, you know, these 2017 releases are about to be unloaded on the marketplace.
Yeah.
You could almost like earmark them for when you'll be interested in picking them up.
Exactly.
Is any part of that bias based on gameplay at all? Like with the idea that new games are not just inherently better than old games, or is that it's primarily a function of just the value?
No, it has to do with understanding that because games come out to a lot of fanfare doesn't necessarily mean they're going to be really good games. And I appreciate reviewers and the market and all these other outside factors telling me about the games with some depth over the course of months. So, you know, when it comes to games that are released now, I think this time next year, I'll have a much better idea of, is this game going to be something that I'm interested in? You know, like if I buy a game that's being released tomorrow, I really have no real idea if it's for me, but over the course of a year, people talk about it. I get the better sense of if it's a good game. So it's not only for the trade value, but it's also to get games I know I'll like.
So you don't want to be a tastemaker? Because that's all I've ever wanted to be.
Yeah, no, I'll be a taste eater, a good taste eater.
My God, this goes back to KFC again. I'm going to kick you.
I was trying to think of it. You preempted me. Dang it, Neelan.
One of my specific biases is towards like theme and aesthetic in a couple of two sort of opposite ways. So there is a period and type of Eurogame aesthetic, which I want to say is from about 15 years ago, which is like the brown box. It's like, this is kind of the classic cliche, brown box, scowling man on the front cover. And I will often see those games in a friend's game collection and just have this weird thing about not wanting to play them because nothing about that is speaking to me. And it's a bias I need to work against because some of these games have gone on to become games I love, like El Grande, Ra. And there are a couple that I still just are games that I know that you've spoken highly about, Mark, specifically, like Kalis, for example, that I feel like I have to play. But for whatever reason, every time I see that box, I'm just like, nah. And on the opposite direction of that, there are specific like thematic games. And I don't mean thematic in like the Ameritrashy sense, because I'm talking about like sort of Euro games, where if they have a strong theme or a strong, interesting theme, I'm much more intrigued by them. Mind Clash, I feel, are very good about this. Anachrony being sort of like the shining example for me, where Anachrony, by most accounts, is not the most incredible game design, but something about, well, I mean, I like a lot, but something about it being a rich sci-fi theme that they've obviously put a lot of thought into and tied strongly to the mechanics shouldn't be that important, but it really, really works for me. It makes me much more excited to own and want to play that game, even though it doesn't really factor much into the gameplay of it.
So I guess, Neelan, then you're saying that if Anachrony was illustrated by Clemens Franz, and set in ye olde Agricola time, that you wouldn't like it.
I would be much less likely to care about it, yeah.
And that makes you biased.
Yes.
So to what end, right? Because like Vindication, which I have not played, but the theme doesn't matter.
Yeah, that's actually a really good example too, because in some ways, like, the game itself is interesting. I honestly think, again, that without the theme there, I would care less about it. But Vindication, despite being a game that is very, unlike Anachrony, is not strongly tied to its theme, the idea that it is a game, a Euro game, quite a specific Euro cube conversion game, the veneer of themes that you're moving around an island, sort of leveling up your character, is enough to just make me feel stronger about it. I think that if it was removed from that, the idea of a Euro cube pushing game is just not enough. But you sort of layer on this cool art and this interesting thing, and suddenly it's like, okay, yeah, this is doing something that not many Euro games do. Therefore, it's going to like appeal to me.
This is probably where a Scythe joke would go.
Scythe is a great example. Scythe is a great example. You've said before, like, I have that picture, I have that artwork, on the wall behind us. Like, that theme is a lot of the appeal to me. It's a cool, unique sci-fi universe. And that's enough to like at least be part of the appeal.
I think that it would be worth exploring, perhaps in a future episode, where the breaking point is and where the tension there is, where
at some point, if it's too much theme versus gameplay.
It's a theme that is entirely unsupported by its gameplay, and how that tension. I find the tension. Well, Neelan found the tension. Yeah, so one of the biases that I've observed or noticed about how I acquire and play board games is a bias towards things that are obscure, international, and in some ways specifically Japanese. I grew up, loving Pokemon as a kid and always having like Japanese exchange students in my house, and that has led to somewhat of a fascination with Japanese culture. But if a game is obscure or weird or international, I will give it a lot more leeway than other games of its ilk. So a good example of this is Magical Athlete, which is a absurd roll and move game about special powers where everyone drafts a little team of heroes and then they compete in a roll and move game with most ridiculous game-breaking powers. It's pretty fun. It's kind of fun. It's hilarious. The art is horrific. The board is literally the ugliest board game board I have ever seen in my life. And yet somehow that becomes kind of part of what's good about it, right? And if this was like a release from Stronghold Games, I would just be livid, and I would be, I would be out there going like, Stronghold can't possibly do this. And like somehow because the game, came from a foreign country, I'm like, well, this MS Paint art, like that's fine, and that's funny, we're having fun, right, guys? And I think that that's pretty dumb, but certainly true. I have a bias. I will purchase every Oink game that comes out, basically. And then I will hound them on Twitter and say, can't you send me one of them early, please, Oink games? Even though those games they aren't inherently better because they are from a foreign country. But for me, that is something I have started to observe in myself.
My next board game bias feels a lot like the same way I think of parking. So for me, parking feels like something that should just be there. Like I hate factoring in time for parking because it just feels like parking should be a God-given right. That's just something I can't break out of for whatever reason. I'm born and raised in LA. I should know better, but I just feel like taking account of time for parking feels wrong. So my bias when it comes to board games is physical puzzles versus mental puzzles. So specifically, or I guess the easiest way to think of this is like with tile placement games. I'm biased against games where you have a tile or you have a piece and what you need to figure out is how to rotate it. Like, is it better to place this where the roads connect or should I have this mountain touch the road? Like, it feels to me like that's like a small, like mini thing that shouldn't be what the game is about generally, which is weird because some of my favorite games have this like physical puzzle tile laying element to it that I enjoy. Like Feast for Odin is a game that has this when it comes to covering up your little sideboard. It works great. It's something that I enjoy about the game. Tigris and Euphrates has like a tile laying element that I love. It's one of my favorite games of all time. But for some reason, whenever I see a game that when it's being sold or being like a preview is being made for it, and I see tile laying and I see like roads connecting to roads or like trying to make a big farm or a big city or, you know, anything like that, some part of me that I know is incorrect says like, but that's not what the game should be.
I think I know what you're talking about a little bit here because while I really like Palomino type games like that, like Feast for Odin, I would love that jam. There was something specific about Pipeline, right? Which I think is what you're alluding to, which is like, if I spend 10 minutes, I could find the perfect place to put this.
Right.
And the puzzle is, how much time do I want to spend trying to rotate this, align this, put this in different places?
I guess that's like the foundation of where that gripe comes from. Yeah.
It feels like less so much like a mental puzzle as like, how much time and effort am I going to expend on this specific thing?
I think this goes a little bit to some of the disagreements that we've had about parsing the board state and like whose obligation or whose job it is. And not to get us back to like PAX Premier Gate, but in reality, on the last turn of a game, if there are 10 options and sorting out which of the 10 options is best,
right,
you have this propensity to be like, there's an assumed best option. And if someone accidentally gets the second best, I feel like these are connected somehow. And I'm trying to figure out.
Yeah, I don't think they're one for one, but there is a connection there. Like,
the game isn't looking at a picture and needing to find the green color in the corner.
Right. It's a difference that we have that I have a hard time really defending. I think I could have pressed, but the idea that you, going back to board state, if at the end of the game, it's somebody's last turn and they have a fairly obvious way to win and they don't take it or they miss it or something like that, I'm much more okay with them just saying, oh, I should have done this for the win. That just feels like, for me, more of a time, like, suss out the board.
Yeah, but there is, I guess as this applies, right? So let's apply it to a generic worker placement game.
Yeah.
You know, is the function of a generic worker placement game that part of the game is like evaluating the board and the pictures and the iconography and putting your worker in the right spot? Or is that just a list of action choices? Like literally that could be, you could be handed a piece of paper. And in some sense, what you're saying is that the board is just an abstracted representation of a piece of paper with a list of actions on it.
Yeah, I guess it's somewhere in between, but no, I see I understand what you're saying. I think there is something to sussing out the board state for sure. There's obviously something to it. I just think, and this is getting a little too specific, but I just think that when it comes to toward the end of a game, I'm much more forgiving of like, let's just figure out who actually played better.
Yeah, I think we are trending out of our assigned topic here, but it's like, this is really interesting to me.
Yeah, right.
This feels really, really interesting.
The next bias I want to talk about is something that it's two that are linked together. One that's quite specific and one is broader about why that the first one's biased. So video games. I like video games and I like board games that attempt to replicate video game systems. One of the things I think is quite interesting is where you have some of these systems that have existed in video games for a long time, and vice versa. Obviously, that this is sort of a two-way street. But when you see a board game that starts to utilize video game systems in an interesting way, there's like, I think there are a couple of board games on Kickstarter that are now trying to do the Battle Royale thing, for example. There are a lot of board games that are trying to replicate MOBAs. And I love the idea of taking a system from one medium and trying to reinterpret it in another. And this speaks to another thing that I'm generally quite fascinated about, which is adaptation. Like literally the transposing one medium to another. Like the idea of like, how do we take Dune, a sort of elaborate book series, and turn that into a board game that distills that experience? Like I am fascinated by the process of adaptation across all mediums, and board games is one of the things that feels the most interesting to me, because you sort of have to take something that is broad and sort of evokes a specific emotion, whether that's a video game or a book, and try to distill that into a rule set that sort of tries to convey the same thing. I love games that try to do this, and I will always be intrigued by them. Even if there are video games that I'd have no immediate interest in, I'm fascinated to see what like the Doom board game looks like. Even though I have no sort of actual immediate appreciation of the Doom video game, I want to know what that is. It feels like it's something that excites and interests me from a design perspective more than the merits of the board game to even justify.
And how does that apply to just strictly like licensed stuff? Because I feel like I would say I have a bias against just like straight licensed stuff.
I think that's probably true. But like the reason why I sort of separate them is because I have no interest in the Doom license, right? It's like, it's not the Doom license that's bringing me towards it. It's the process of how did you replicate Doom in a board game? Because another good example for me are CGE games. I feel like do this a lot. Adrenaline being a great example, which actually does a decent job of like saying, this is a first-person shooter video game that we've turned into a board game. And it doesn't really feel like a first-person shooter, but they've tried to sort of replicate some of those systems. That is, I think, fascinating to me. And that's sort of tangential from being a licensed video game. Like it's not, there's no Adrenaline video game, but it's the process of replicating an experience through the board game medium. Fog of Love is maybe another example that didn't really sort of sit well with me specifically, but I was fascinated by it because the pitch is it's the romantic comedy board game.
Right.
And I'm just like, that's so cool. That's interesting. Like, how do you do that?
Right.
Like, what is your design process to get from, I want to make a romantic comedy, but it's a board game.
Yeah.
Like,
right.
I love that.
Yeah, that's cool.
Even if the game itself ends up not being that worthwhile, which in the case of Fog of Love was absolutely true.
I'm envisioning like the digital version of Gloomhaven to inspire some kind of PC game Gloomhaven that then gets turned back into a board game.
Right.
You know, and sort of just...
Well, that's actually the funny thing, because that happens more than enough, where you have like the movie of the video game that becomes the board game and then back, and it's, yeah.
It's funny. I feel like a digital version of Gloomhaven would hurt the board game version.
Yeah, and they're doing it too.
Yeah.
It is interesting because like I do think like you would get rid of all like the fiddliness, the sort of micromanagement, just get the game.
It's like what happened
there.
to Through the Ages. Like Through
right,
the Ages.
that's a great example. Yeah. And that's actually one of those weird ones, because Through the Ages is, in my mind, a board game implementation of Civilization, which is now turned back into a better video game than the board game. It's
crazy.
It's funny because I feel like I'm biased against this idea, because the concept is essentially jamming something that doesn't belong into where it belongs.
True. I get it. It's almost like quote unquote lazy design in a way, which is kind of like, well, here's this cool thing. How do I turn this? But I think there are so many hurdles you have to overcome to make that work if you're a good designer, that it is still an interesting design challenge. It's almost like the game jam idea of like, this is what I'm trying to do. Now, how do I overcome the design challenges to get from A to B?
Yeah, like what's the constraint?
Exactly.
And that will perhaps breathe new life or bring some concept to life that otherwise would never be thought about.
Right.
Because there's that one, what is it, like Battle for things?
Kemble's
Cascade, and it's supposed to be like Asteroid or like Centipede, where like literally the spaceships are like moving towards you, and it's some card array thing that simulates that. And like, why would you want to play that? I mean, I have not played it, and it could be interesting, but it's just like the idea of it seems absurd to me.
Right.
The second bias that I would just wanted to call out, that if you listen to the podcast, you probably know, is a extreme aversion towards cooperative games. I think that if a co-op game is longer than 30 minutes, I will no longer be willing to participate in that game unless specifically requested by Mark and Neelan to cover it on the podcast. There is a competitive spirit in me that I just don't understand, and I continue to try to understand where the fun is in that, but just I don't see it. I don't experience that fun. And so you have this level of games like Hanabi and The Mind and The Game, which are sort of the perfect co-op experience for me, which is a great opener or social icebreaker type thing, and I love those games. But the second you cross that line, like, I can't comprehend what people find interesting, honestly, about a game like Pandemic. It just feels like rote memorization of systems. The game, it becomes more about the systems in a game when it's not a competitive experience. And when it becomes more about the systems in the game, I just start realizing how rudimentary they are and I'm not interested in it. You know, Pandemic is probably a great example because the deck can just screw you and then you lost the game, and sort of that narrative arc that everyone talks about. Well, we almost won, you know, or we just barely snuck by, feels completely arbitrary to me because the game is designing that experience for you instead of it emerging from the players playing with each other.
I've had a thought percolating for a little while now about you in cooperative games specifically, which is like, I wonder if it's like the nature of interaction, right? Which is to some extent reduced in a cooperative game. And I wonder if there is like some sort of like highly interactive game where you're constantly forced to like work and cooperate with specific people at the table at various points that could be distilled into a game that you would actually enjoy. Because I do think like a lot of what you're describing is we're going to sort of loosely cooperate against this board, and it doesn't feel like you're having a substantive like interaction with any one player at the table at any given point in time. I always wonder if there is some part of that is still a cooperative game that would be something you would dig.
There is a competition in him. He wants no one else to succeed.
But I don't think that's it. I'm almost like speaking for you, but like I still think that there is.
I mean, I like escape rooms.
So yeah, well, I mean, that's a good example because you're forced in almost all situations to be like, you and me, let's figure this out. We're going to go to this corner of the room and we're going to figure this out, right?
Yeah, and I think we hoped that Spirit Island...
So that was my best example, but I don't think it's still enough there.
I just want no one else to succeed.
Daniel Plainview.
But I do think in some ways it's important for us to, you know, be upfront about some of these things because I don't want to hinder the world of board games that loves cooperating with each other, you know. To round out the episode, to sort of deep fry... seal in our insights, we wanted to do a rapid fire round on some of the biases that we perceive within the industry as people are evaluating their games. And this sounds kind of nefarious, but it just means like things we notice that people are trending towards or away from. So my note that I continually hit is a bias against interactivity or take that elements. Everyone is wanting games to essentially be solitary experiences, or they only want positive player interaction, which is just obfuscated actual player interaction.
Right. They worry about damaging or raising somebody else's position, and that fear of hurting someone else, I think, has led to more games being, like you say, multiplayer solitaire.
Yeah.
There's also the Kickstarter thing. I think the tide is sort of turned on this. I think in our Discord, I'm seeing, although that we have a Discord channel for crowdfunding and people are still getting excited about games, I think people are much more cautious now about jumping in on every Kickstarter game. So I think this is a bias that is sort of going from one direction to the other. Yeah.
I think it's a lot of these big Kickstarters are fulfilling in the 2 or 3 years since they launched.
Yeah.
And suddenly it's like, wow, I have 5 dozen big boxes around my apartment.
Right.
Do I need another 5 more?
I keep having this idea that, and I know people do something similar, but through the lens of just sheer trash talking would be a video where you're just scrolling through all the new Kickstarter campaigns and just like going to town.
Oh, right.
On, like 77 minis, you know, like 240, and like
for sure.
Just completely like tearing down
Absolutely.
all the hype that everyone is like, now we've got 310 millimeter, clear coat on these cards. Like that's the decision for me, man.
You're all excited about this game, and in 5 years, this game is going to be that game. And then you just like pull up another picture of like a Kickstarter game that nobody's talking about, nobody cares about anymore.
That is going to do it for this episode of the Board Game Barrage podcast. Thank you so much for listening to the show. We will be taking a Thanksgiving break so that we can have our turkey dinners.
From Where are we getting our Thanksgiving dinner from?
KFC.
That's right.
Our chicken turkey. Do they have turkey on
I think they probably do.
At KFC? You think
for
they have
Thanksgiving, Neelan?
I guess I no. I,
I'm
now
gonna
you put it like that.
wait a minute, guys. Give me 60 seconds, and I'll know the answer to this.
Oh my God!
Again?
He left again. So I don't know if he's coming. Is he joking or what's going on? No. Well, I hear your front door is closing too. So
Yeah.
Kellen has left the building. So I guess we're gonna wrap it up.
I tell you what, if we don't have KFC in 2 minutes, I'd be very disappointed.
Right. No, yeah. Listeners should know that we may stop this to actually, if he comes back with KFC, we'll let you guys know. But I'm presuming we are not going to have any delicious fried chicken. That's going to do it for the show. You can find us on all forms of social media. You can find our Discord at boardgamebarrage.com/Discord. You can find our Patreon at boardgamebarrage.com/Patreon. We're going to be recording our Patreon episode soon. I thought we were going to maybe record it today, but without Kellen, I don't know what we're going to do. Maybe a 2-man Patreon. Give the people who've been
What they
paying us
want.
a hard-earned money.
What they actually want.
What they actually want.
Yeah.
Yeah. Instead of like 1/3 garbage, 2/3 great. Instead of diluting the Patreon only feed for a hero plus villain situation, we've got just the hero.
Yeah.
It's the hero cast.
Exactly.
Yeah. If you want the hero cast, go to boardgamebarrage.com/Patreon and join, and you'll get that. Thank you as always to Heart Society for our intro and outro song, What's on Your Mind, Kid? That is...
They do serve turkey at certain locations nationwide.
All right, we're out of here. Bye. You only have to say bye.
Bye. That's like the dumbest bit we've ever done. I love it. Say my name. Callan. Well, okay, let me do this differently. I don't want to say
Yeah,
first.
okay.
Numbers
all
specifically.
all you need to say is, I was wrong.
Yeah, okay.
Say that.
Fair enough.
Say that.
So I was wrong. No,
Mark?
that's not making it in.
We've got
Nope.
it.
Yeah, we got it.
Not happening.
Damn it. I've spent like 30 seconds trying to come up with a KFC reference. To round out the episode, to sort of deep fry, seal in our insights, we wanted to do a rapid fire round on some of the biases that we perceive.
So I was wrong. So I was wrong. I was wrong. I was wrong. I was wrong. Wrong.
I could start a timer from the top of my stairs and be in KFC ordering the chicken, and 60 seconds or less. The chicken, and 60 seconds or less.